Welcome! It is episode 4 of the Cynical Centrist podcast. For June 22nd, 2019, I am the Cynical Centrist. Just a big welcome to all the new followers on my Twitter account first off, and thanks for getting me to 100 followers on Twitter. Already nearing 200 at the time of this recording. I'm seeing 184, so thanks for that. Also, I know a lot of them were supporters of Andrew Yang and Marianne Williamson, so if you see my question on Twitter, please do answer it. If you are listening to this podcast, do go to my Twitter, @Cynical Centrist, and go and check out that question, please. The question was, what moment, interview, or event made you wanted to vote for him or her, Andrew Yang, obviously for Yang Gang, and for those that had the Marianne 2020 hashtag, Marianne Williamson, and why? All right, the big thing this week was the Poor People's Campaign, and I have a nice review of each of the candidates there, a full analysis of how the candidates did in delivering their message. But first, the re-election campaign of the annoying orange has begun. Yay! Your favorite orange and mine, Donald Trump, was in Orlando, Florida. Awesome. Florida for oranges. Awesome. For the rally to jumpstart this re-election campaign. They raised $24.8 million in 24 hours that day. He's the only Republican candidate running at this point, so that should be obvious there. Being president has that kind of perk. I mean, it's not a guarantee, but you might as well write Trump into the general election in November 2020. I think someone might have attempted to primary the incumbent president once in like the last, at least as far as I remember in the last 100 years. Someone mentioned Nixon might have been primaried, but yeah, that just doesn't happen anymore. If you're the incumbent, you essentially have a bye into the general election. So I watched the raw feed from Fox News for this one. I thought it would be better than listening to CNN and MSNBC. Started out with Pence speaking. You can see some Make America Great Again signs, as well as his new slogans, 4 more years and keep America great while he speaks. To a background of all white folks, except there was an Indian man and a black man, which I think is the most diverse I've ever seen for a Trump rally background, for what it's worth, at least a people background. Pence says, we need 4 more years and it's time for round 2. Sounds like what the Democrats would say about impeaching him if he does get reelected. Pence then went on to say, Trump said he'd make America great again, and that's exactly what we've done in just 2.5 short years. I mean, if by making America great again, you mean become hated by most of the world, just like the days of other presidents, how the rest of the world saw us as arrogant and snobby, then yeah, America is great again. Pence would list all their achievements. Some of them are legitimate to me, but not all of them, obviously, about how Trump rebuilt the military, signed the biggest investment to national defense, supporting ICE, eliminating ISIS, moved the U.S. Embassy to Israel, from Israel to Jerusalem, healthcare choice for veterans, respect for law enforcement, fight against opioid abuse, securing the southern border, and of course, building the wall. One thing I noticed he also talked about was record low unemployment, which is interesting to me because during Obama's time, they would constantly talk about how U6 unemployment rates and labor force participation were bad. And even though, yes, the unemployment rate, U6, has dropped, and the labor force participation has gone up, it has not gotten to the levels of even the 90s yet. And they are completely ignoring that. And they're saying, oh, it's just great, record low unemployment, blah, blah. So clearly, labor force participation is no longer a matter when they are the ones in charge. Just saying. You can tell just how different the audiences of the Republican and Democrat Party are. The way that Pence states the Democrats openly promote socialism and huge boos from the crowd. Raucous cheers when he states America will never be a socialist country. And I will talk about this later on, but you can tell just the very fundamental way of thinking of both sides cannot be more different than what we have today. Maybe the Civil War, but I'm not a historian, so I can't really tell you. So Pence introduces Trump and Melania, his wife, to the song God Bless the USA. Melania spoke first, said she is proud to have served as First Lady for 2 years and is looking forward to 6 more. She introduces Donald, huge chants of USA from the crowd. So this was a very long speech, about over an hour, and I think that Sarah Huckabee Sanders did kind of interrupt in between, but I'm just going to go ahead and take the bullet points here. Made a jab at the Academy Awards by saying the media reminded him of the Academy Awards before they went political and down the tubes. He claims to have drained the swamp, but, he's surrounded himself with establishment, so whatever. I guess what he meant by the swamp was not establishment, but the Democrats. In that case, he's failing there too, because the Democrats retook the House in 2018. Just saying. He called the Russian investigation against him illegal and a plot to overturn the results of the election to Hillary Clinton. I don't even think that could have been done. I think that they would have just impeached him and Pence would have been the president. Although Pence would have probably resigned at that point. Resigned after the end of the term. Chance of lock her up started. He accused the Democrats of collusion instead, and that they spent $40 million to find nothing on Trump. Claims that Obama did nothing about possible Russian interference when the FBI told him. I know CNN stated he told Putin to cut it out during a G20 summit in September of 2016. But actually, I kind of agree with Trump on that one. I wouldn't count that as actually doing something. Sanctions would have been doing something, just saying. I also put in my notes he talked about the allegations against Kavanaugh being false. I think a proper term for it is inconclusive, not so much false. Talked about what would happen if the left-wing mob was in charge of the country. They would shut down free speech, use the power of the law to punish their opponents, which actually, it's funny because the liberals are saying that's exactly what Trump will do if he gets reelected. Just saying. During his speech, he had a cheering contest over which motto he should use for his reelection campaign. He started with Make America Great Again. It did get a pretty healthy amount of cheers. Then he said Keep America Great, and that one clearly was the winner. He looked like he was blown away, and he was deafened by the cheers there. Probably was. He is pretty old, just saying. I guess that is his new motto now, so they're going to go with Keep America Great, although I don't think that it's going to be as catchy as Make America Great Again, but all right, well, Sarah Huckabee Sanders gave her farewell speech during this rally as well. Got about a minute in between Trump's speech, said her platitudes, saying there will never be another stronger representative for the president, and so on and so on. I kind of just tuned out at this one. He would go on to talk about the wall, energy, and I know I'm skimming through the rest of it, but Trump really did sound like he was speaking in an infomercial about all the great stuff he's done, and if you have me as president again, if you order again, you will get this and this. And I guess if you are a Republican, then yeah, he kept most of his promises, including the ones that he probably shouldn't have kept. To me, it hasn't been a complete tragedy of a presidency, I will say that. He has pushed prison reform, which I think is the best thing no one has ever talked about with Trump, and the best thing that the media is not willing to give him credit for. That being the First Step Act, which helped expand earned time credits, more chances for prisoners to transition from prison to society through halfway homes, time off sentences for vocational achievements, and retroactively reducing drug sentences. This was done almost in silence in a way, and I know that there were a few people on Twitter that were like, wow, Trump is actually doing this, but you barely heard about this on the news, that's all I'm saying. The USMCA de-incentivized moving jobs beyond the southern border and also improved the quality of life of Mexican workers, or trying to improve the quality of life. I'm not saying that it actually did. I actually do agree with recognizing Jerusalem as Israel's capital, because that was the capital that everyone else, pretty much as far as I know, has gone by, and I honestly thought we had already done. But apparently 4 American presidents had promised to do it and never did, and Trump is the first one to do it, so he kept his promise there. And ISIS has been eliminated, or basically eliminated, under Trump, and the economy is booming. Despite the unemployment rate being pretty inaccurate in this day and age, and underemployment being a huge thing, it is true more people are going to work, so technically they are correct. If I go any further, I'm going to really be scraping it, but it's just to show that I get it. It hasn't been a complete disaster. Despite the scandals and a bunch of other terrible things that he's done, I think this will go down as bottom 10. I was going to say bottom 5 at first, but I realized that we had a lot of pretty terrible presidents, especially right before the Civil War. So I would say bottom 10, maybe 8th, 9th worst right now. But that doesn't mean that Trump has been completely wrong. Now, I get it. A lot of you will yell at me and say, well, this is because you're a political moderate, and I'm being too soft on Trump. Yeah, too soft, even though I refer to him half the time as the annoying orange, yeah. And I know a lot of you are saying I don't talk about Trump enough, but honestly, I think that the news media has talked about Trump too much. The cable media talks about this guy around the clock, and I get it, he's the president. And I get it, they need to get their profits. This guy sneezes the wrong way, they report it. Because news companies do have to keep a profit, and they know what people like or hate, and they want more Trump. Trump and Russia and collusions and scandals. But I'd rather talk about other things that are more important to us as people. 5 or 6 good things he's done does not outweigh 50 to 60 bad things as well. I'm not stating that, but I do want to give credit when credit is due. And when I do want to talk about Trump, I do want to talk about stuff that is new. So that is the reason why I don't talk about Trump very much, and the reason why I feel like I do want to give credit when credit is due. So are y'all pissed off at me yet? Well, if I'm not pissing you off, then I'm not doing my job. That's my motto, right? Well, here's another story a lot of you would get pissed off at me about if you haven't already. This one, if you've seen my Twitter on Monday, Parkland school safety advocate and shooting survivor Kyle Kashuv and had his Harvard admission revoked after dirt dug up on him came up, and he made racist comments saying the N-word more times than you'll hear from people in a KKK rally combined. Kashuv went to Twitter, stated he is horrified by the comments he had made a few years back, has apologized, stated that he has changed and will spend years working to make it right, and is asking to be granted admission back to Harvard. So let's get the obvious out of the way here. Harvard is a private institution. Harvard is going to do what Harvard wants. And if they want to rescind his admission, so be it. Sorry, but you really should know better. Anyone over the age of, I'd say, 13 should know better than to say stuff like that on the internet. This isn't saying the word fuck. This is a racial slur being said over and over again during a time when people are extremely sensitive about race relations. And the internet is forever. Once it's out there, it never truly gets lost in time. It is the world's VCR. And I might have just lost everyone under the age of like 20 there by saying that. So despite what you think, I don't feel bad for the guy. Now maybe around his junior year, he could transfer in to Harvard as a student, especially if he can prove himself. But if they still reject him after that point, I mean, what can I say, you know? I think it would be an issue, but yeah, I am of the belief that you have to be a good person first and foremost. Now, that being said, the only thing that gets me with this is how crazy hypocritical it is of an institution like Harvard, who is currently under investigation for discriminative admission policies against Asians and previously Jews, is going to prevent a person from going to their school because he's racist. Pot call kettle black here. Maybe the issue was he was the wrong kind of racist. If he started shouting Asian slurs over and over, or anti-Semitic slurs, he might have been given a scholarship instead, if he didn't have one already. Ivory Tower and social justice liberals seem to have this blind spot when it comes to their anti-racism campaign of Asians just in general. I don't know if it's a direct result of racism or an indirect... Well, you know what? Actually, no. I do have a theory. And I'll tell you what, next time, because it's going to tie in to the next episode, which will be the Tuesday special, I'm going to explain that theory. And I'm pretty sure I'm not the only one on Twitter who notices this hypocrisy. There were thousands of tweets that mentioned this as well. So again, not sorry that it happened to him. The kid should have known better, but it's just quite hypocritical of this institution to be like that. What he should have done, that is what Kyle should have done, was mention that there might be things like this in advance. He's going to do his part to fix them, or he could have deleted them, because if I remember correctly, the posts were still up at the time, so yeah, I believe that's right. So that's pretty much it. Anyway, we're going to be right back. Poor People's Campaign Review when we return. Alright, we're back. And it's now time for the review of the Poor People's Campaign Forum. But first, special thanks to Audionautics.com for the opening song, and Pulsar Radio spinning new alternative rock, indie, punk, metal, and hardcore, Wednesdays 6 to 9 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. midnight Eastern at radiovegas.rocks, or go to @PulsarSmash on Twitter to download the app for free. Also, follow us, myself, on Twitter at Cynical Centrist for more ramblings of a moderate misanthrope. And remember, if I'm not pissing you off, I'm not doing my job. So for the Poor People's Campaign, I put down on my notes at the very top, great concept, but crazy long. This went 6 hours. I get that they wanted to give each of the candidates 30 minutes of airtime, but it's clear they needed to cut this up over 2 to 3 days. Have 3 candidates a day, and each one over the 3-day period, then have your workshops and other speakers scattered throughout the remainder of the event. I could have gone with 2 days, they could have done 5 now, and then allow one of them actually did not make it. There were supposed to be 10. Julian Castro missed his flight. He could have gone to the second day, basically. Other than that, I like this. Reverend Barber was amazing. This guy should honestly run for president. He was easily the most entertaining, sharpest of the event, candidates included. It was quite interesting. What I like here is that they're attempting to promote helping out all poor people and not just certain types. So not just poor minorities, but poor whites, poor people in the South, and so on. And Reverend Barber definitely emphasized this in his questions, so kudos to them for that. Other than it being long, the only other problem I had was the production value was absolutely terrible, and that was coming from the MSNBC feed. They had some pretty inexperienced people working the stream there, not as bad as many that I see on Twitch. There's actually one I was watching on a YouTube about a pro wrestling company putting their shows on Twitch that is coming to mind right now, but it was still pretty bad. So the 9 candidates who were there to speak were Joe Biden, Andrew Yang, Marianne Williamson, Elizabeth Warren, Michael Bennet, Eric Swalwell, Wayne Messam, Bernie Sanders, and Kamala Harris. And like I said, Julian Castro was also scheduled to appear, but his flight got canceled. But that would have made this even longer. Each of the candidates got a 4-minute opening speech, followed by another 22 to 23 minutes of questions. The questions were asked by Reverend Barber and Liz Theo-Harris, the co-chairs of the Poor People's Campaign, and they were all the same to each candidate, but there were also questions by the audience, and they were different questions, obviously. Now, I had a poll out over which rating system that I should have been using. Now, I used the 0 to 10 rating system. I rated them from 0 to 10, but I had a couple other options as well, a 5-star rating system, A to F grade, or red, yellow, green, a system that a friend of mine had thought up where green is good, yellow is okay, and red is fail. Overwhelmingly, 63% of you wanted the A through F grade, so I have changed my grading system for this podcast today, and I'll be grading them all from A+ to F-. We started the day with Joe Biden, and oh dear God, help me now. This was, for a frontrunner, a horrible performance. His opening statement pretty much consisted of standard platitudes. He almost walked off the stage after that opening segment. They had to tell him to sit down because they had questions to ask. Part of the first question asked candidates how his campaign is going to help address the plight of the poor, and Biden jumps right to talking about why he can win the election and how he can win North Carolina, Georgia, Florida, and Texas. So instead of his priority being about how he's going to help the poor and how he's going to try to strike down against poverty, his priority is about how he's going to win the election. Wonderful. Now, to his credit, he did make a few promises like universal Medicaid, triple funding for Title I schools. He mentioned situations where he seemed almost like he was being hypothetical about, like mentioning eliminating the stepped-up basis loophole to provide everyone free community college. A lot of talk, but it seemed a lot like he was talking to himself and not to his audience. Every time a question was asked, and they wanted an answer as to how he would help the poor people, he would redirect it to people in general. The most cringeworthy moment, there was a tie. He stated how no one has to be punished right after talking about eliminating a loophole for the rich. We have all the money in the world, and where Joe Biden talked about the poor folks down there, those poor folks, what they call hanging chickens in the chicken industry. That was both of those moments were total cringe. I'm going to give him a D. This was absolutely pitiful. Now, I don't think it could get the massive hate that it did if it wasn't for the fact that he was so popular. I mean, the replay I did watch got 22 likes and 109 dislikes. But when you're the front runner, when you're the candidate who promises fundraisers that their quality of life will not change, and nothing will fundamentally change under your administration, well, what can I say? Especially in a Democrat primary where people are begging for change. And to the people that call Joe Biden a centrist, you know what? I'm getting sick of hearing Joe Biden or Elizabeth Warren or Andrew Yang are centrists, all right? They are all liberals. They're all pretty progressive. Matter of fact, Biden is almost as liberal as most of the progressives that complain about him are. Just because they are to the right of Bernie Sanders does not make them centrist. Biden's problem is he is pro-establishment. There is a huge difference. He wants the status quo. There are plenty of moderates out there just as sick of the same old as you guys are, but they just don't like some of the solutions brought on by liberals or conservatives, and might have their own solutions for fixing things. Hell, even amongst other progressives, they have different solutions. Now we're going to segue with that to Andrew Yang that was speaking next. He pitched the idea of universal basic income, Medicare for all, and human-centered capitalism to the masses, but he had a few issues here. Now, on substance alone, I would say that Yang did win out the debate tonight. Well, not really debate, the forum tonight. Matter of fact, no one's going to touch this guy on substance, so he's always going to kill it there and will probably get higher marks on forums and debates because of it. But the problem was his delivery. It was only marginally better than Biden's. He was very self-promoting, almost condescending to his audience. One example, one in particular that got me was, he asked his audience, what is the antidote to poverty? As if he was talking to a ton of his own followers rather than a neutral crowd. So naturally, the crowd is so silent you can hear a pin drop. He then had to answer it to himself. The antidote to poverty is money. Yeah, that was a little bit cringy. Some of his policies did get a couple claps from the audience, though, which led Reverend Barber to remind people to not clap after each answer. To me, that did raise Yang's stock a little bit. By the way, if you guys are hearing, noises in the background, I do apologize, but the road does get a little noisy this time of the day, so I do apologize for that. I do have my place right next to a roadside, so probably not the best idea for a podcast, but, got to work with what I got. So anyways, Andrew Yang also keeps talking about the mindset of scarcity against the mindset of abundance, which I think rang all right with the crowd. Now here's something interesting to think about. Andrew Yang had come under fire for talking about the plight of poor white people in a tweet, which led him to get the alt-right conservative votes, which has made the media hate him. So, Reverend Barber asks him a question about how he is going to help poor white folks, poor people in the South, people people doesn't assume are actually poor. Literally a question tailor-made for him. Barber set up the ball perfect for Andrew Yang to spike it, and he drops the ball. He just doesn't talk about it. Why? To be real, this is not Yang's finest hour. I'm going to give him a C+ because of the substance and the audience response to his policies alone, but yeah, this was definitely not his best work. After an almost hour intermission, Marianne Williamson is next. Right off the bat, she had passion, she had fire, she got the crowd going. She really did bring it, and that actually surprised me a little bit, especially for a candidate that's not doing so well in the polls. Now, someone on social media mentioned that she did come off as a bit too preachy, and she did use the word revolution quite a few times, pushes for slave reparations and repealing the tax cuts overall. She lacked a little bit of substance other than that, but I really didn't see too much of a problem. This was a great job. B+, very solid performance by her. And you'll notice that with the exception of Elizabeth Warren, the rest of the reviews I will make a little bit short, because it does get to a point where each of the candidates are talking about the same thing, free healthcare, a whole bunch of other stuff as well, promising an economic revolution for a few of them, promising they're going to drain the swamp or stop the Republicans or stop Trump. So, there's a lot of similarities here, and I just don't want to talk about the same similarities for each of the 9 candidates over and over. Elizabeth Warren talked about a wealth tax, 2% wealth tax on anything that you have over $50 million. This got, in my opinion, one of the best responses of the night, and honestly, the first half was great. She's the only one that I feel like can rival Andrew Yang in substance and issues, and do it with a lot more passion. Warren also added a few other promises right off the bat in the first half: free childcare, free healthcare, raising the wages of teachers and childcare workers to the professional levels that they deserve, canceling student loan debt, and that she would hit the opioid crisis head on. Mind you, this was all in the first 15 minutes. The last 10 or so is pretty much filler, but getting all the points right there off the bat, solid performance, and I'm going to give her a B for that. Michael Bennet is next. His issues was stating the top 0.1 of 1% control as much wealth as 90%, moving out Donald Trump and the Freedom Caucus, who he says immobilized the country, rebuild infrastructure, and increase teacher salaries. He wants to get veterans back to the workforce more quickly, and he also talked about climate change. His problem? The delivery. It was a bunch of filler, followed by a lot of yelling. Then a bunch of filler, followed by a lot of yelling. He went back and forth with this. 4 minutes of his responses went to him just rambling, followed by him yelling for another 30 seconds. So I'm going to give him a D+, not really much to say about that. Eric Swalwell was next, talked about zoning rights, and that's about the only thing I have of him in the notes here. Very boring delivery, no response from the crowd. Barely anyone knew who he was, and this somehow made it so that even less people knew about him. D-. Definitely last place of the night. Very little to talk about with him. One thing to note, though, he said that he wants to bring his campaign to Tennessee and Alabama during a primary, because without going to those states, how are we going to win them? Yes, because I can see the Democrat nominee winning Tennessee, where Trump won by 26 points, and Alabama, where Trump won by 28. These will totally flip blue. And he wonders why he's barely hanging on in the race. Him and like half of these candidates, honestly, would be better off either trying to hold on to the positions they already have, in his case being a congressman, or run for a senator governor spot where, they might actually have a chance. They took a break after that and had Wayne Messam. His segment was largely focused on immigration reform and spending most of his response time about why we need to take money away from defense and the military, and that's about it. The only thing I hear is why we shouldn't question healthcare for all Americans if we don't question the idea of a southern wall. Pretty standard stuff, but he did deliver it pretty well. And especially after the last two absolutely horrible performances, this was kind of a nice breath of fresh air. I'm going to give him a C. It is kind of a shame he's not going to be in the debates, though. But it was about as typical as you'd expect. I think he did well, and considering he's not in the first debates, I don't see, though, how this is going to help him get into the debates in July. And, there wasn't anyone really trending for him on Twitter either. So while that does help those who did poorly like Biden, because no one's going to be watching it, it does hurt those that might have done well enough that he could have turned a few heads, at least enough to hit the July debates, like Wayne Messam, which is kind of a pity, to be honest. Bernie Sanders was next. Opening statement: someone tell Michael Bennet, this is how you deliver a message without being annoyingly loud. This was clearly home court advantage for Bernie Sanders, though. He did used to work with the Poor People's Campaign, I think multiple times. 3 people own more wealth than the bottom half, he would say. Only developed country in the world who doesn't offer health care, college debt. He pushes to racial disparity as well, calls for a political revolution. And I think this is the 4th candidate to call for this. I know Yang had said something about an economic revolution. Williams had said revolution so many times I thought she was turning into a Pokemon. And I believe Warren did as well. Bernie Sanders also did something Andrew Yang didn't, and mentioned numerically that more whites are poor than any other ethnicity. He did mention that rich people live 15 years longer than poor people. And the most interesting issue was that he wanted convicts to be able to vote while in prison. That one is an interesting one, as part of his plan to make voting easier and increase voter turnout. I'm not quite sure what to think about that one, because I think this is the first time I've actually heard of that idea. But I'm initially against that idea, but I guess I would want him to tell me, and I'm willing to hear it out. He did get the best response in social media by a landslide, so I do have to take that into consideration, and also his pretty good delivery. So I'll say he won this forum with an A-. And finally, we had Kamala Harris. Now, one of the big complaints on social media was how she infused religion and God into her opening statement. This was my criticism about Pete Buttigieg as well, which, I know he's not here, but the idea that you're going to talk about religion in a Democrat primary when Republicans and evangelicals hold almost a monopoly on religious authority, to me, is laughable, and that's just bad political strategy. Other than that, she did a pretty decent job overall and delivered her points really well. I think I put down a C+ here. At this point, though, it was so long, and I feel really, really bad for her because I know everyone was just tired at this point. I did try to take that into account. So I put down C+, and I think she finished about middle of the pack. But overall, the winner was Bernie Sanders. Marianne Williamson finished second, and I think, honestly, Marianne Williamson is going to be really scary in the first debate. I mean, now, the Daily Beast did report a couple days ago that she sees forced vaccines as draconian and is going to more than cancel out this great performance of hers, in my opinion. So I'm not quite sure how that's going to help her or hurt her in the debates that much. Third, I'm giving to Elizabeth Warren, solid performance. That was clearly the top tier in this forum. The middle tier, Andrew Yang, won on substance but lost in delivery, and honestly, to me, being very condescending to the audience. Kamala Harris, the religious overtones, not great. I think she also suffered from a tired audience as well. Wayne Messam did okay, pretty standard. Michael Bennet really just needs to get some of that weed that his state legalized as governor, because he was the very epitome of angry old white guy shouting at a cloud. Joe Biden was just sad, and Eric Swalwell, well, let's just say he's probably not going to win a primary anytime soon. So that was the Poor People's Campaign Forum, and we're going to wrap this up with something a little funny to lighten up the mood when we get back. Welcome back, everyone. So before we close things out, I do want to mention that I am making a second podcast episode this week on Tuesday. This one's going to be a special, and it's going to happen the night before the debates, the first debates that's coming up on Wednesday and Thursday. I'm going to make things a bit more personal, and I want to talk about the candidate I'm voting for, the pros and cons of voting for said candidate, what I think the future holds for said candidate, and why. And I might also list my top 5 overall as well, and I might do that at the beginning, actually. So now I want to end on a funny note. A friend of mine sent me this article from Friendly Atheist, him being an atheist, over a sign on a church. Now, you know, a lot of these churches have little boards with signs that change, and some of them are quite clever. This one particular sign from 2nd Avenue Baptist Church in Corsiana, Texas, honestly made me want to go there for church on Sundays. It reads, "God specializes in happy endings." Now, it turns out they weren't the only ones that used this. I actually posted a picture of White Methodist Church having the same sign set up on theirs. So, yeah, they had set this up earlier, but honestly, put your mind to the gutter for that one. Now, clearly these guys know what they're talking about. I mean, that's the kind of marquee sign that can actually get someone to think, maybe I should go and check out what they got to offer. So anyways, that's a wrap, everybody. Be sure to follow at Cynical Centrist for more, and I'll see you on Tuesday for the special. Bye, everybody.